My name is Isaac Butler, as I've mentioned, and I am the Director of Hearing Healthcare for My Hearing Centers. I have been in the industry for about 11 years. I'm board certified hearing instrument specialist. I actually started out in Idaho as a hearing instrument specialist. After a few years there, I ended up going and working for one of the largest manufacturers, Oticon, as an account representative. I spent a few years there and gained a lot of experience, and from there ended up coming to My Hearing Centers and have been with My Hearing Centers now for a few years, and I've really enjoyed my experience here as hearing healthcare director and director of educational services. My Hearing Centers is one of the largest independent hearing healthcare providers in the western United States, and independent is I think it's an important term. It's a term that I think is overlooked. What it means is that we have the flexibility and the ability to fit really any of the major brands, major manufactured products that are out there. It really gives us the flexibility to find the solutions that might make the most sense for the patient's lifestyle, their budget. In Utah, we are the largest, and we have offices up and down the Wasatch Front, but we also have offices in the Nevada area. We're one of the larger providers in Nevada, along with California and Idaho, and as I mentioned earlier, just in the western United States. Something that is a little bit unique about My Hearing Centers is we are, education to us is very, very important. We take it very seriously, and really one of the primary ways in which we educate our patients and potential patients are through seminars and webinars like this. We really have been doing these for many years, at least seminars, and we've put together a lot of pertinent information, we believe, as you might have begin the process of getting hearing help, or maybe you've been down that road and are looking for additional questions. I'd like to start out with a joke, if I may. It's a bit silly, but it kind of helps me transition into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be discussing today. So if you've heard it, I apologize. But there was an older individual who went into his doctor for a routine checkup, a physical exam. After the doctor had reviewed the results of the exams that were run, he realized he was going to have to deliver some poor news to his patient. So he walked into the exam room and delivered this news. Well, to his surprise, the gentleman got a huge smile on his face. He jumped off the exam table, he shook the doctor's hand, and left the room with a little spring in his step. Well, never had the doctor seen one of his patients respond so favorably to such poor news. Well, as it happens, about a week later, the doctor sees this gentleman walking down the street with that same smile he had a week earlier, but with a new addition. Attached to his arm was this beautiful young woman. The doctor was a little bit confused by this, given the information he had just given the doctor, so he couldn't resist. He walked up to the patient and said, "How you doing?" The patient said, "I'm doing great, doc. I've never been better. I took all of your advice. I want to thank you very much." Well, even more confused, the doctor asked, "Well, what advice did I give you exactly?" He said, "Well, you told me to get a hot mama and be cheerful." The doctor looked at him and said, "I didn't say that. I said you have a heart murmur and you need to be careful." Now, I know that's a silly joke. It's kind of a cute one, but oftentimes when patients come in to our offices or they come to the seminars, one of the things that we hear is, we hear it all the time, I can hear, but I can't understand, or I have a difficult time understanding my grandchildren or my spouse, or when I get into noisy places. So it's kind of a reoccurring theme that we see. So today, as we talk, we want to talk a little bit about why that might be occurring, but maybe more importantly, some of the lesser known effects of a hearing loss. There are some things that occur with a hearing loss that oftentimes is either overlooked or just isn't talked about much. We want to talk about the mental effects and how it can affect us long term. And then also the effects of treatment and why we should be more proactive versus reactive when it comes to addressing a hearing loss. Some of the questions that we address when we do these seminars and that I've addressed over the years as people come into the offices are, what are the symptoms of a hearing loss? How do I know if I have a hearing loss? How common is the condition? Is it normal for me to get hearing loss as I age? Or am I unique or different? how did it happen? What are the different causes? And will it get worse? So I'd like to address a few of these, but before I do that, I just want to kind of point out some different facts and some things about hearing loss. Hearing loss is the third most common chronic disability as we get older. So it's very prevalent out there. In the U.S. alone, we have over 32 million individuals that have hearing loss and rising. And there are a few reasons for that. One of the reasons is that we have an aging demographic. More people are turning 65 and older and are continuing to live longer. An interesting stat, every day now for the next 10 years, 10,000 individuals will turn 65 in the U.S. That's a pretty staggering number if you think about it. That we see, and we're seeing more of, is primarily with younger individuals, but it's the way that music and noise is being delivered, primarily music through these earbuds. So those are some reasons as to why we see more people that have hearing loss. But one of the symptoms, or a few of the symptoms that are out there is, if you're continuing to ask your loved one to repeat themselves, that's a pretty good indication that there may be hearing loss. If you're always asking, what was that, huh, honey? If the television is being turned up dramatically, especially more than your spouse, that's a pretty good indication. Tinnitus, the ringing or buzzing in the ear, that's something that we run into a lot. It's not always associated with hearing loss, but most often it is. We're not going to really dive too much into that today, but if you have specific questions on that, please feel free to send us your information, and we will definitely email that and get you some additional information on tinnitus. So hearing loss, as I previously had stated, is actually quite common. As we age, it's part of the aging process. And there are really four main causes or reasons as to what are causing hearing loss. This is no particular order, but it can be due to age. We call that presbycusis. It can be exposure to loud sounds, which is probably one of the most common. Hereditary or genetics. And maybe one of the more lesser known out of those four is ototoxic medication. There are certain drugs, strong steroids and chemotherapy that can cause hearing loss, permanent nerve damage. Hearing loss is not going to get better when you have permanent nerve damage. It's either going to stay the same, and most likely it's going to get worse. And we'll talk a bit about this later as we talk about the effects of treatment and why it's important to get treatment. But at my hearing centers, that is why we feel so strongly about follow-up care and helping a patient not only hear well from the initial point that they might get a solution, but throughout the life of the patient. It's really important to us. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the lesser known effects, but before I do that, I briefly want to just touch on there are really three different types of hearing losses that one might have, and the first is a conductive loss, and I apologize, I don't have an image of I don't have the anatomy here in front of me, but if you can kind of envision the ear, a conductive loss, which is the first type that we're going to talk about just briefly, is really damage to the outer or middle ear. An example of that would be earwax. If our ear is completely full of wax, that is considered a conductive loss, and really the solution is easy to that. We remove the wax. If we have a hole in the eardrum, that is considered conductive. And again, typically when we have a conductive loss, those can be corrected through medical treatment or surgical procedure. The second type is what we call sensory neural, oftentimes referred to as nerve damage. And that is, if you can, and again, envision the ear, in the inner portion of the ear, there's a little organ that looks like a snail. And inside that organ, there are thousands of little hair cells called cilia. And when those sustain damage, then we have what's called a sensory neural hearing loss, or again, sometimes referred to as nerve damage. And that's really where we focus our attention, because it's very likely if you have a hearing loss, 75% chance that if you do have a hearing loss, that it's sensory neural, that you have some damage to those hair cells. And that's really where hearing devices come in. And then the third is a mixed loss, which is a combination of the two. So as we talk today, we're primarily focusing on a sensory neural loss. So then as we talk about the lesser known effects, and this is oftentimes overlooked, but hearing loss can lead to anxiety and depression. And there's been a number of studies, that Johns Hopkins in particular, that have conducted these studies. And again, this is information that we can get to you as requested. But if you think about how an individual may get anxiety with hearing loss, and I see this on a day-to-day basis, as a patient comes in and they have a loss, and as it progresses, as they're becoming more engaged or as they want to be engaged, they get anxiety oftentimes because of the concerns and frustrations that they have when they get into these social situations and people are asking them questions and trying to engage them, and they are not hearing the conversation, and either they're pretending as if they do, or they simply just have to continue to ask what, which eventually can lead to social withdrawal, which then can lead to depression. Also, fatigue and headache and tense muscles. As you get into these environments with a hearing loss, individuals have to really put a lot of effort out to understand what's going on, to decode. And it's frustrating. It's very, very difficult. It can lead to the tense muscles and the headache. And again, eventually people will withdraw or they'll just tune out because of the frustration that they experience there. So as we talk a little bit about kind of these lesser known effects, some of the more serious things that we have encountered or that we see, and there are studies that have backed this up recently, are the mental effects, the cognitive decline, mood changes, and links to dementia. There's something that I want to just focus on, and it was a study that was released 2 years ago by Johns Hopkins, and it talked about the brain tissue loss in the auditory cortex due to hearing loss. So there was a researcher at Johns Hopkins that over a 10-year period had done some studies on two groups of people, a group of people that had normal hearing and a group of people that had a mild hearing loss. And every year he would conduct an MRI and a PET scan of the brain to find out, was there or could there be any effect on the auditory cortex due to hearing loss? It was interesting what he found. What he found was that yes, indeed, there was. Now, as we age, we know that the brain shrinks. That's normal. But what he found was the individuals that had a mild hearing loss, the tissue was shrinking at about a rate of a cubic centimeter faster per year than those who had normal hearing. Now, if you think of a cubic centimeter, if you can envision what that might be, think of a sugar cube of sugar, about that. So it was a pretty powerful, I think a pretty astounding study. He also, previous to that, had saw a lot of similarities between hearing loss and the early onset of dementia, and wanted to kind of dive into that and see if there was a relationship. And according to his study, he did find that there was a strong correlation there, that an individual with hearing loss would be 5 times more likely to develop dementia. Now, I'm not saying that because you have a hearing loss, you are going to develop dementia, but the likelihood is there, and he went on to say that two main reasons. One is that as you get into the noisy and more challenging environments and you're trying to decode, it becomes much more difficult, and the brain puts out more effort, and because of that becomes a little bit more vulnerable. And secondly, and maybe more significantly, is that as we get into these social situations and as the hearing loss progresses, we tend to withdraw from those because of some of the other lesser known effects that we've already mentioned earlier today. So because of those reasons, an individual is more likely. So very serious and very important that we take care of hearing loss. And really, it's one of the main reasons as to why we should be more proactive versus reactive. Through the course of my experience in the industry, oftentimes as I sit down with patients and I talk with them and ask them, why have you been putting this off as long as you have? there are a few different reasons, but oftentimes the individuals will say, well, Isaac, I can hear still. I'm getting by. You know, it's kind of that approach that because I still can hear, there isn't a need to do anything about it. But really, we're finding that more reactive approach, waiting until it's too severe or until it's profound, until they can't communicate at all, is really not the best way to approach this. You know, as we address these hearing losses, and with the technology that's available today, we've seen people that have been suffering from anxiety and depression and fatigue and headaches and tense muscles, that be alleviated significantly. There's again, studies that show that as well. Also, it can have a positive effect on keeping us cognitively more engaged and lessening the likelihood of dementia. So for those reasons, being proactive about addressing a hearing loss is so significant, and there's never been a better time. As technology has really evolved, it's evolved into where now we have very advanced digital solutions that we can customize to the need of the patient rather than just amplifying all sound and making things louder. We can really make things more clear, help people understand, and really help with some of the more frustrating situations. For example, in restaurants where there's a lot of noise, that's been one of the most frustrating things that a lot of patients encounter, and manufacturers have done a fantastic job now in addressing those concerns. Not to mention some fun other things like Bluetooth capabilities, where we can now connect directly to cell phones and iPads and televisions and all these other fun accessories that we use on a day-to-day basis. So there's never been a better time. So really, for those who feel like they have a hearing loss, or even if you don't know for sure, because oftentimes hearing loss is so gradual, you know, the next thing to do would be to first, you know, prevent further damage and take care of your ears. And there's a few things we can do there. You know, if you're going to be exposed to loud sounds like shooting guns or, you know, factory noise or hobbies like woodworking, getting some ear protection, either custom made or some that, you know, over the counter that can prevent further damage there. If you're going to listen to music through iPads or iPods or through these earbuds, you know, be conscientious of how loud you're turning it. Also taking care of your ears and making sure that they're cleaned frequently. And there's a visual inspection. In my hearing centers, that's something that we do for all the patients that come in, and we do that complimentary. You know, talking to your loved ones, what's interesting about this is that oftentimes the individuals that notice that the hearing loss first is the significant other. I cannot tell you how many people will walk into the office, and I'll have a husband and wife, and I'll ask the husband, or let's assume that the husband's being tested, you know, do you feel like you have a hearing loss? And that individual will say, no, not really. But then I ask the significant other, the spouse, and they will say emphatically, yes, that I'm noticing it and that it's affecting our relationship. So oftentimes it's either the spouse or it's the grandchildren or children that are really noticing it. So talking with them and asking them and getting their sincere opinion, I think would be strongly recommended and encouraged. And then schedule an appointment to diagnose. At my hearing centers, we do complimentary hearing evaluations. And when we do an evaluation, it isn't just can you hear me now, kind of a whisper test, but it's a very thorough evaluation where we do a battery of checks to understand and try to really understand the problem. You know, is it a conductive loss, or is it a sensory neural loss, or is it a mixed loss? You know, how well is the individual understanding? We visually inspect the ear. We do a bone conduction test, to understand what the needs are. So it's a very thorough evaluation that takes about an hour, sometimes a little less. And we also have the ability to demonstrate the technology live in our office. So as an individual comes in, we can put the technology, we can customize it to their needs, and give them a listening experience, much like when you go in and you're, you know, looking at maybe correcting your vision. It's very powerful when you can show someone what they're missing and let them experience the difference. It's one of the more enjoyable things that I've had the privilege of doing over the years, especially in the last few years as technology has gotten better. It's a very, at times can be a very emotional experience, and it's very, it's the fun part of what we do. And then lastly, being open to making a change. You know, oftentimes people are sometimes we're stuck in our ways and we're getting by. And, you know, I think being open to what's out there and what's available, and that not thinking that technology is what it used to be. It's not like what it used to be. It's night and day difference. And we've seen it change people's lives, and it's really our motto. We change lives through better hearing, and really take it seriously. So as we wrap up, just wanted to again reiterate that we have offices throughout the western United States. We were established in Sandy, Utah. It's where our corporate headquarters is, but we do have offices, as I mentioned, for the convenience of our patients in the western United States. And for those individuals who might be outside there, we also have affiliates and networks of individuals that we work with. So wherever you may be located, if you have an interest, please reach out to us and we can facilitate a complimentary hearing evaluation. With that in mind, again, we appreciate everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar, and we will probably be doing these in the future. So if you have individuals that you can think of that this would be beneficial, please let us know and we will get them on. Thanks.